bright spots in our economy. Record job growth, higher wages. Too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control.
At the start of a whirlwind week in the world of politics, President Biden gave his first State of the Union address. Still lagging in the polls, the president touted infrastructure spending and promised to fight inflation by building and buying more American products. While war rages on in Ukraine, Biden said he wouldn't let Vladimir Putin's actions go unpunished. I spoke with Chair of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison, about the party's platform and the road ahead on Capitol Hill. And Jamie Harrison, thank you for joining me. Of course, the president gave his State of the Union earlier in the week, and he spoke about a lot of the good things that went on during his first term. Every president likes to do that. But the reality, of course, is people are feeling pain at the gas pump and in the stores and the grocery stores. I'm just curious whether even the talk of a new bridge or a new road is enough to steer them away and help them feel better from the pain they're feeling.
Well, listen, President Biden last night spoke directly to the American people about where we have been, what we had to overcome, and where we're going. He has a distinct plan to continue to address the issues that are impacting the American people. When he came in, he inherited a country that was grappling with a pandemic like none that we have ever seen in our lifetime. When the economy was beginning to crater, people were losing their jobs. The sense of uncertainty was very, very high. He worked very diligently with Democrats in the House and the Senate in order to get things done to start to alleviate some of that pressure. Now, we still have some of that pressure. People are still dealing with high costs in terms of products. But he laid out a plan, a bold plan, to address that, to bring down the cost for the American people, to make sure that they have jobs that are good paying with high wages so that they can take care of their families and their loved ones. That's the type of leadership that we needed in this country. That's the type of leadership that we have with President Biden. He spoke in a very plain way to say, this is my plan to bring down the costs. This is how we bring down the cost of childcare. This is how we bring down the cost of products and manufacturing goods that we all utilize. Now, the only part is that we wish we had Republican colleagues who could join us in those efforts.
Well, let me ask you about that, because, of course, the president spent the first 12 minutes talking about Ukraine.
Yes.
Lots of bipartisan support there, so that seemed to go really well for him.
Which was tremendous, yes.
But moving forward then to his domestic agenda, and you're kind of highlighting that, but I guess my question is, what can they hope to get accomplished in the time if they lose the House and or the Senate in November? What kind of agenda can they get accomplished in the time that remains?
Well, listen, it's all my intention. I'm working my behind off to make sure that we don't lose the House and the Senate. We actually grow our majorities. That's what the president and I are both committed to doing everything possible, because we understand that in the end of the day, our Republican colleagues are not focused on addressing the everyday needs of folks. And I can give you an example. It's not partisan rhetoric. It's an example. They talk about inflation. They talk about the need to bring down costs. Well, Senate Republicans had an opportunity to do something about it. We just had some folks that the president has nominated to be on the Federal Reserve. And as you know, the Reserve has the power in order to address inflation and costs and interest rates and the like. Well, instead of actually doing their job and actually attending the hearing, they didn't show up. They did not show up for work. Now think about this. All of us have jobs. What happens when we don't show up for work? You may not have a job afterwards. These people didn't show up. So they like to talk about issues, but they don't do the work that is necessary to address those issues. But this president is committed, and he's going to do, whether with Congress or without, he's going to do everything in his power to find ways to alleviate the pressure of the American people.
And of course, better better to do it with Congress when he can.
That's exactly right.
And so looking at that agenda, he touched on a number of issues. I thought it was interesting because he sort of positioned himself more in the center. He also reached out to Republicans discussing issues like, and some of these were sort of quick lines, but we need to secure the border. And of course, he talked about helping veterans and funding for the police. We don't defund, we fund the police. Was that an attempt to reach out and bring sides together and make things a little more centrist?
Well, it's also speaking plainly to what the Democratic Party has always done. You know, I know Republicans like to take credit for these issues, but, you know, I was a young staffer on the Hill when Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi, made sure that we funded our veterans at record rates. And that was during, you know, George W. Bush was the president at that time, and we increased the funding for veterans. That's something that Democrats have always stood for and continue to stand for, and that's what you're seeing with this president right now. In terms of defunding the police, the funny thing is, Paul, in the American Rescue Package, we put billions of dollars into that package to fund state and local governments and police forces during that time. And guess what? Not one Republican voted for it.
Just less than a minute left. A couple of things I just want to ask you while we have the time together. First of all, you talk about taking, you know, even growing the majorities, but a lot of people say Democrats have I've had Democrats elected tell me that Democrats are not really good sending around the message. Republicans do that very well. What do you do to plan to improve the message that Democrats send out for the election?
Well, you know, part of our problem or part of the thing that we have to deal with, there's so many messages, so many things that we want to say. When you think about the American Rescue Plan, when you think about the bipartisan infrastructure law, those are bills that would have defined one term of an administration because they were so big and they were so chock full of things that had meaningful impact on the lives of folks. And so there's a lot of stuff in there to unpack. Our problem is that we need to just make sure that we pick 4 or 5 of those things to say, this is what we have been able to do and accomplish on behalf of the American people. But we also can't be afraid to do the contrast. This is what the Republican Party stands for. And it's sad to say the party of Lincoln is now the party of Trump. And that party is defined by fraud, fear, and fascism. And so, you know, I never would have thought in a million years I'd see Ronald Reagan's party, well, the man who said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall, now be celebrating the guy who is one of the heads of the KGB, calling him smart and savvy and a genius. You know, this is about being and coming together as a nation. And it's sad to see the Republican Party isn't all together joining Democrats to stand strong, united against oppression and standing up for democracy, not only here domestically, but around the world.
Well, you as the DNC chair have that message down, so you're sending it out. We'll see whether or not your colleagues in elected office can get that message out over the months to go, because Republicans are certainly doing their effort to send their message out. DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison, thank you for your time today, sir. We'll watch you as these months go on and we reach towards election time.
Thank you so much for having me.